Okay, thanks everyone for joining the webinar. For those that don't know me, I'm Colin from APB Works Coaching. I've been coaching for around 10 years now. Pardon me. I'm also a former professional long-distance triathlete, retiring in November 23. And I'm joined here by Wei, who is a master bike fitter. Has been in the industry for around 15 years. He's also a mountain biker, triathlete, and a coach. And he founded Foundation Fit, which are now based in the Velo Park in the former Olympic Village. And really, we've got Wei here because Wei and I have worked together closely for the last couple of years, helping athletes perfect their bike position, but also in turn trying to help them run fast off the bike. So really, I wanted to bring up this this webinar to help, I guess, show people what the prerequisites are for running fast off the bike. Then also Wei has 5 top bike fit tips for running fast off the bike as well. So really, this podcast is going to be all about Wei, and I'll chip in as and when. And then afterwards, there'll be a Q&A for anyone who has any questions. So please do ask questions. So yeah, over to you, Wei.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cole. Thanks for the intro. And actually, it's not about me, it's all about you guys. Yeah. So we want to give you as much useful information that you can take away and implement and make use of, or just get your juices flowing, get your kind of brain juices going, thinking about what you're doing on the bike and how that can affect your run and so on. By no means what I'm going to tell you is kind of gospel at all, but really just to get you thinking about it. And as we all know, everything is very individual in terms of performance and what works. And so, yeah, let's explore some of that today. And if anyone, as Colin was saying, if anyone's got any questions at the end, we really want you to kind of ask them. Like, this is your chance. There's a couple of experts here, and the more questions that you ask, the more you'll get out of it. And also, everyone else will get out of it as well. Like, the nice thing about doing these webinars is that there's lots of you in the room, and I'm sure there's lots of questions that you might not have thought of that other people will kind of ask too. So yeah, don't be shy. Stick some questions in the chat box if you want to, or give us a shout at the end, and yeah, we'll answer as much as possible. And also, we'll record this. We are recording, aren't we, Colin? I think
We are.
yeah. And so we can replay this. And if you've got any questions beyond that you're thinking of, you're lying awake at night, you can't sleep because you're thinking about your run, and you've got questions, yeah, just shoot us and we'll be happy to help out. All right, let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. There is Colin in the background there. So we're going to talk about how you can run fast off the bike, run faster maybe, and how I'm going to give you some unusual kind of tips from a bike fitting point of view that might help you unlock your running strength and your hidden triathlon potential. And you might not necessarily have to do more running to do this. As we know, triathlon is a multidisciplinary sport, but we should kind of regard it as a whole. And so kind of what you do in one discipline will always affect something else. But before we even get onto all of that, we just need to get into the prerequisites of running. Like, what do we need to run well off the bike, and what are the differences between running and biking? And it doesn't need to be complicated. I could go into kind of a lot about kind of biomechanics and windlass mechanisms and all that kind of stuff, but I want to keep this kind of relatively kind of simple because the concepts themselves are not complicated. So got this nice little slide up here, and we can see just from this, it's pretty obvious how different your body posture is when you're on the bike to when you're running. Running is very much an upright kind of sport, and this is what your body is designed to do. You were designed as a human being to be upright on 2 legs, running, walking, and that is how your entire system is best kind of performing. Cycling itself, as a lot of you will know if you've come through the Bike Fit program with me, is rather unusual. It's a very hunched sport and bent over kind of posture. So there are two completely different postures, but yet we still need to harness both of these kind of postures to kind of get the ultimate performance out of our sport. So I'm just going to move on. And if we take swimming into account too, we're not going to talk too much about that today, but you can see again, like the posture from swimming, you go from completely horizontal onto the bike where you're kind of semi-horizontal. So your back, if you're in a good position, should be relatively horizontal, but your legs are still kind of extending vertically to an upright kind of running pose. So we're kind of putting some unique demands on our bodies as triathletes, and we should be conscious of that. And once you start to be conscious of that, then you can start making better decisions about how you perform, and maybe start to understand some of the strengths and weaknesses that you have within your sport and how best you can kind of improve upon them. I just threw this slide in here because we always love it. So just, we've worked with Colin, as we said, for quite a long time, and just going through, actually, Colin got bike fitted by Matt, my colleague, over in the Bike Fit studio, and that definitely helped to improve his performances on the bike. And actually kind of we'll get onto it a little bit later, but there's an interesting story behind Colin's bike position, which really kind of started to unlock his run, certainly through Ironman and 70.3 kind of level. But we've worked also with like lots of other high-level athletes, including Fran Brown, who's now a multiple Olympian and world champion, multiple world champion. I think she won like 6 kind of gold medals at the most recent cycling world championships. But certainly as a triathlete, she went to Tokyo. So yeah, it's been fun working with lots of different types of people, but generally, yeah, there you go. We work with all kinds of kind of normal people, like you guys. There's Greg, there's Helen. I think Helen, are you on the call? Probably see yourself there. It's Keith over there. So yeah, it's all you guys who are really focusing on, even though we do like to chat about all the kind of professionals we work with, day to day, where our bread and butter and kind of where we really see the gains are in the age group athletes and so on. So yeah, okay. So if you guys don't know me, I'm Wei. Colin's already introduced me, been bike fitting a long time, started out a mountain biker and got into triathlon, ended up coaching triathlon as well at club level, and yeah, father, so understand time constraints, and also I'm a cargo bike hill climb champion. It's the only podium I've ever got, but thought I'd throw it in there anyway. And our lovely studio in London is at the Olympic Velodrome. We are unique in that we have a race circuit or a road bike circuit, you can see in that picture, where people can kind of test ride their bike fits after their fit. So we can really offer something quite unique in terms of allowing people to test their positions and actually see kind of what happens in reality. And I'll get on to a little point later on about kind of testing indoors versus testing outdoors and how important that can be. All right, so enough about me and more about you guys. So we're going to talk about prerequisites of running in triathlon, 5 bike fitting tips, and then get your questions answered. So we covered that already. All right, let's get back onto kind of running and biking. So yeah, like running after biking is challenging because we have to go from a semi-horizontal position into a kind of upright and vertical position. I'm sure even coming out of the swim, I'm sure some of you have experienced that. You come from a horizontal position out of the cold and straight out onto maybe a little jog out to transition, and you get a bit of a head rush and so on. So similar kind of things happen on the bike, where you're spending a lot of time in a horizontal position, getting upright, and your body has to work out, like, what are you trying to get me to do now? And the main area that we kind of want to focus on is really around the hips. As Shakira says, hips don't lie. And the big change is kind of getting you from a closed hip position, as you can see in this kind of diagram with the cyclist. Your hips are very closed as you try and bring that leg up and try and get aerodynamic, to a very open hip position. So, anytime you're going from one extreme to another, your body's going to have to readjust and change. And so how can you kind of best kind of, from my point of view as a bike fitter, how can we best tailor your bike position to kind of enable this upright kind of bike position? And this is where the uniqueness of the challenge takes place as well, because we're having, like, the lower you get on your bike and the kind of smaller and more horizontal you can get your body position, the faster you'll go on bike. But as we are saying, just go back, like triathlon is all about combining all three disciplines into one, and the overall result, the overall time, is really what we're interested in. It doesn't matter if you can go super fast on swim, super fast on the bike, if you fall apart on the run. So this is the kind of great puzzle of triathlon, and everyone always has one sport or one discipline which they favor, and we tend to lean into that. But we tend to say that your greatest wins are always in where your weaknesses are. Those are your greatest opportunities. So have a think about that as we go through this. So just moving on back to kind of bike fitting in particular. If we want to run fast off the bike, then we have to create the right environment for your body to be able to access the kind of movement patterns so that you can run well. If we kind of simply kind of prioritize your bike performance, get you as aerodynamic as possible, get you as powerful as possible on the bike, then that will create a cost at some point, and you need to figure out what is that cost in terms of your running performance. Because if you can't run, as we said earlier, then your overall triathlon performance just doesn't matter. Why are you doing triathlon in the first place? You might as well just be a bike rider. So bike fitting has to create the right environment, and from that you can get your best performance. And just going into bike fitting very generally, for those of you who come through the studio, you know all this already. But those of you who haven't come through, then these are just some of the kind of basic benefits of bike fitting. If you've not kind of done one or considered one, then all of these things are kind of goals and wins that you can get from your bike fit. And most people think about the three kind of pillars of kind of bike fit, which is always like getting more comfort, speed, and efficiency. But we also like to add in three others, which are more kind of not rather than physiological kind of advantages. They're more psychological kind of advantages. So getting more enjoyment out of your bike riding. If you enjoy bike riding, you'll be confident. If you're balanced on the bike, you're confident. If you're confident, you'll get faster. But also the other upshot is kind of having autonomy over your bike fit. So if you have your measurements, if you know you're in a good place, then you can control what you can control, and you're controlling your performance overall. So if you haven't had a bike fit, go get one for sure. All right, and yeah, if you haven't had the bike fit and you haven't created the right environment, or do you know if you've got the right environment or the best environment so that you can find your best performance? Without it, you're likely working harder than you need to. Bike fitting is all about creating efficiency. So why work harder than you need to? Find the gains, get yourself in the best position possible so that you can perform at your best. Otherwise, you're literally leaving speed and performance on the table. All right, let's get into the 5 kind of tips that I want. And Colin, you're up first. So I'm going to throw you straight in there. Because actually it's a really interesting example, and not one that we kind of talk about a lot. The kind of key point is about posture. We all know that posture in general is a prerequisite to kind of strong performances and performance in general. Our mums knew that when they tell us to stand up straight, stop slouching. They know what's good and not. And you know as a human being what kind of good posture is when you're out on the street. If you see someone kind of hunched along and shuffling along, something's not quite right. And so the same applies to all the sports that we kind of take part in. Posture is a kind of foundational part of our performance. And so if we can find those good postures, I use the example in the bike fitting room all the time. When someone tells you to lift a box, you already know, you've been told a million times to, straight back, bend your knees, hold good posture. So the same applies to kind of all sports that require us to perform um, at a high level. And so, yeah, in terms of bike fitting, the image on the left is Cole before on his Cervelo bike in a slightly more hunched and crunched up position. And Cole on the right hand side after having done some bike fitting with Matt. You can see his torso position far longer and much straighter, better neutral spine position. And from that, everything else kind of falls into place. Like your aerodynamics will be better if you can get into better posture, and therefore your speed will be better. Breathing is easier. Like if you kind of sit yourself in a crunched up position, if you roll yourself into a ball, close up your diaphragm, you can't breathe. And I'd say breathing is pretty important. Getting that oxygen and blood supply in, and your muscles rely on that oxygen. So the better you can breathe, the more open you can keep your diaphragm, then the better your performance is going to be, or certainly give yourself the best chance of that performance.
I'd also say that way that those pitches are, I think, like at least 6 years apart, maybe 8 years.
Yeah,
And Matt had the patience of kind of fitting me multiple times,
yeah.
purely because I can't sit down for 10 minutes. But yeah, those were a number of iterations over time. It certainly wasn't the kind of like one equals the other. And I think that's worth noting for a lot of people that come in for a bike fit, right? It's not a
Sure.
one and done thing. It's certainly a relatively painful process, really, of kind of molding your body to the machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends, like, kind of how where your position is currently, how far you want to go down the rabbit hole, what you're prepared to do to get into what is your kind of optimal position. For you as a kind of professional, then the stakes are high, the goals are kind of high as well. So, spending that time is important. But yeah, absolutely. Things take time, but everything is possible. Like bodies change, your body is malleable, and so I think a lot of people also psychologically get kind of stuck into, or they get told that they have bad posture, or they are kind of rounded in the spine, or they have tight this or tight that, and that psychologically can kind of limit you as to what you think you can achieve. But everything is possible.
Equally,
So
I'd add to that I remember coming into Matt and taking screenshots of like some of the best cyclists in terms of their position, and that just winds up bike fitters because everyone is an experiment of one, and I think you really just got to focus on yourself and your own physiology, which is completely unique, and work that over time. And whilst there are kind of trends of different fits going on, particularly now in long distance triathlon, it's super important to just focus on yourself and getting the best out of yourself.
Yeah, and that requires understanding what's important for you as that experimental one. And you were an interesting case because the main issues that you were having were actually GI issues. Like you couldn't fuel yourself because you couldn't kind of hold that fuel in, and that was really that was the main thing that was kind of holding back your performance rather than kind of actually being able to pedal the bike fast enough. And
Yeah,
a
and
lot
I
of that.
think, yeah, no, and to that, like I think Bike Fit was one of the last places I kind of searched for when I had kind of GI issues. And as you can see in the picture on the left, like how kind of crunched up I am. And essentially when you're trying to, stay aerodynamic and fuel on the go, you want to maintain that position, but you're trying to fuel in that kind of crunched position, which was creating issues from a kind of digestion point of view, but also from a breathing point of view as well, which obviously has a massive impact on the run. So the top of the back, like the thoracic region of the spine, was super tight. So when I was running, I just felt super winded. And essentially those muscles have kind of contracted, which made running just like almost impossible. And there was a few races where I literally had to walk because I couldn't breathe. So, and all that was largely down to the bike fit.
Well, there you go. So yeah, absolutely. So like concentrate on that kind of posture, make sure your bike fit is sorted. It's allowing your body to get into the right kind of postures. And again, just setting you up for that kind of good run, getting that oxygen and getting that fuel in. And yeah, getting you ready, especially on, the longer the distance and the more it matters. All right. Number two, finding some more interesting pictures via the wonders of the internet. Um, but yeah, cleat position, something we get asked about all the time, but gets particularly interesting when it comes to triathlon. And if you kind of look closely at these pictures, then you'll notice that the cleat positions on these are kind of slightly, these images are slightly unusual, apart from the one right at the bottom. And I think that one with the red shoe, I think it might have been Daniela Reef's bike.
Yeah.
Back in the day, where she rode with kind of midfoot cleat position. Now, I'm not advocating like midfoot cleat position is like, the best thing for all of you, but I just wanted it as a kind of start point for discussing kind of cleat position, how it affects you and your running specifically. And actually, we need to kind of talk a little bit more about biomechanics and the most important muscle probably for your running is probably your calves. So your calves are the most explosive kind of muscle in your body, the most plyometric muscle in your body. You can't jump without your calves, and this is really what gives us like a lot of power when we go, or that spring as we kind of go into our run gait. And so cleat position has a direct effect on kind of how we use our calves. And as triathletes, you can kind of quickly understand that we want to save our calves for that run. So it's a sport of economy. And so if we're overusing our calves on the bike, then we're just not going to have as much energy or kind of power through our run. And the calves relative to the rest of your muscle groups, like your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings, are relatively small muscle groups. So we do have to be economical on what we use, how we use our calves and so on. Just gonna go, yeah. So I want you guys to think about this as well, just through kind of standing mechanics. So if you stand on your tiptoes, like on the image on the left, you will immediately see that you activate your calves. And if anyone's kind of worn high heels and stuff and spend all day walking around on high heels, then yeah, you absolutely know that your calves get absolutely smoked. Not speaking from experience, but just from what my wife tells me. So if we go back to kind of cleat position, where you position your cleats will have a direct effect on how your foot functions during that kind of pedal stroke. The further forward, the further towards the front of the toes we position the cleats, then the more likely you are to kind of put all that weight into the front of your shoes. So it's a bit like kind of wearing a pair of high heels, because your cycling shoes are rigid. And so all that kind of weight has to go somewhere. You can't kind of flex your foot the same way as you would do when you're running. So this is why track sprinters, like on the velodrome, generally position their cleats really far forward so they can get that maximum kind of explosive sprint power out of their calves and that plyometric kind of jump out of their calves, because their race lasts like 10 seconds, like less than 10 seconds. Triathletes, on the other hand, you need to preserve your calves. You need to kind of make sure you're not overusing calves during the cycle. So the more rearward you put your cleats, the more you're going to favor your posterior chain muscles, the kind of glutes, the hamstrings, the bigger muscles, and the less you're going to activate your calves. And just as a quick thought experiment, or you can try it here. I can't see you guys in the camera, but try it. Like, if you want to jump, you have to use your calves, and you jump off the front of your foot. You can't jump off your heels. Like, if you just try jumping off your heels, it's exceptionally hard. So that's just a quick illustration of how you can, changing where you put the weight through your foot has a direct kind of effect on how you're kind of pedaling and running and so on. So yeah, Daniela Reef kind of went extreme and kind of went to this kind of midfoot kind of cleat style, and it seemed to work for her. She did pretty well. So again, you kind of have to treat yourself as an individual though. Some people like that kind of style, some people don't. There are kind of pros and cons to each of it, but generally speaking, a more rearward cleat position is going to favor triathletes and favor kind of saving the calves of that run. So if you have been getting off the bike and you're feeling like your calves are getting smoked and you're getting calf cramps or quad cramp, things like that, that could be an indicator that your complete position may be a little bit off. So
Is another cue for that way is where you see people and they're kind of pointing down their toes when they're pedaling. I mean, it's not to say you need a completely flat pedal stroke at the bottom, but if you're kind of pedaling and your toes are in this position, you're also obviously more likely to be engaging the calf and Achilles when you're riding.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we do have to treat people as individuals, because there is no kind of one pedal stroke that will apply to everyone. Like there is a kind of ideal, I guess, and that is a kind of flatter kind of pedal stroke that we want to kind of trend towards. But there's so many things that kind of add up to it. And yeah, that kind of pointed pedal stroke, it will be more taxing on the cars, but the question is, is that because your bike position is forcing you into that toe down pedaling style, or is that just kind of how that's just kind of how you is that just kind of how you pedal as an individual? I've seen a ballet dancer come through the studio, and they spent years and years on point. So it's really, really hard for her to do anything else but point her toes, and especially when she's working hard. But yeah, you get swimmers who have very mobile feet, and so they can kind of drop their heels a little bit more. And then the other extreme is mountain bikers who kind of have been taught from like a young age to kind of drop their heels because you need that control when you're kind of getting over jumps and things like that. So everyone has a different level at which they kind of operate. So we need to figure out, what is it for you? Is your bike position kind of helping or hindering you, or is it forcing you into different positions? And I included this kind of picture of the squat, again, just as a quick illustration of like when you're loading heavy, if you're trying to do kind of hard work and produce good power, you'd much prefer to have your whole foot on the floor. You wouldn't want to lift on your tiptoes. But as we know, if you go to the gym and kind of spend a bit of time in the gym, then there are such things as squat shoes. So, depending on your mobility, squat shoes will kind of raise your heels up, and that actually makes the squat easier depending on how much kind of ankle mobility you have. So, sometimes we just need to kind of help that process along depending on your physiology and kind of what's happening. But yeah, have a think about your cleat position, because that will definitely have an effect on kind of how you run off the bike. Cool. All right. What's next? Crank length. One of Matt's favorites, one of our favorites. Again, something that's really not kind of explored that much in kind of when you can kind of get into bikes and stuff, because it's no one really offers that many kind of different sizes, and it's hard to change crank length and so on. It's getting a little bit more trendy, seeing lots more people kind of exploring shorter cranks and professionals and so on, and particularly with triathletes as well, because triathletes aren't regulated in the same way as like kind of UCI cyclists and so on. So triathletes tend to be a little bit more progressive about their thinking and kind of how they adopt crank lengths. But I drew out this kind of image of this guy cycling in the middle with some lines on it, and the yellow line right at the bottom near his cranks is just kind of his crank. It's kind of illustrating where his crank is. And you can imagine that if his crank is pointing right up, so this is where his crank is at the top of the pedal stroke, this is where you're having to bring your leg up into your hip to kind of flex the kind of hip as much as possible, just to be able to bring your foot over the top of the pedal stroke. You can imagine that if that yellow line that represents the crank, if that crank arm is longer and that yellow line gets longer, he's just going to have to lift his hip much higher up into his torso. And that everyone, depending on what your hip mobility, like it just kind of creates more restriction through the top of the pedal stroke. Again, like going back to thinking about the difference between running and cycling requires you to kind of bend forward into a very unnatural kind of flex position, whereas running requires you to be upright. So again, if your hips, if you spend a long time in a closed hip position, like if you're doing an Ironman, 6 hours in a closed hip position, then when you get up to run, it's just going to be quite difficult. So if we can reduce the amount of hip flexion, it's just going to be easier for you to run off the bike. And so shorter cranks tend to allow you to kind of travel and create the distance that you need to on the bike without impinging kind of hips as much. And there's a myriad of other kind of interesting kind of side effects, and kind of being able to get more aerodynamic and so on without losing power. But if you're interested in crank length and so on, go to this guy on the left-hand side, Matt Appleman. He makes some really lovely crank systems, but he's got a load of different crank resources and some really interesting illustrations about crank length on his website. Right, I'm going to kind of move on about crank length, but if you want to talk to me more about crank length, I can talk to you all day about it, but I'm just going to move on so that we can keep going. This one, also something that's kind of come up recently with a few athletes. It's kind of interesting. And a question we get asked all the time is whether or not I should buy kind of triathlon specific shoes. And the answer is always it depends. But some certain things that you should consider about triathlon specific shoes. The main goal of using triathlon specific shoes is for speed and transition. So these were designed specifically for initially like kind of Olympic distance or sprint distance triathlon, where every second counts. And the ability to kind of run into transition, drop your stuff, put on your helmet, run out with your shoes attached to the bike already, and kind of elasticated in position, ready for you to kind of slip your feet in whilst the bike is rolling, can be a game changer. That can kind of win or lose, or certainly lose the race for you. And so shoes were designed with like kind of big kind of pulls at the back of the heel, as you can see in the image on the left, and also minimal closure systems. So compared with kind of road bike shoes, which kind of use these boa dials and so on, quite a lot of the triathlon shoes still retain just use Velcro straps as a retention system because it's quick and it's easy and it's fast. The downside to this is that because the retention systems are fairly minimal, and the shoes also have generally a lot of ventilation to kind of vent out water and sweat after the swim, there's not that much structure to your shoe, or there is definitely less structure to your shoe compared with a standard road bike shoe. And so the less structure there is, the less stability there is in that kind of shoe itself, and the more likely it is to kind of not provide as much support for your feet. And if you think about your feet as your foundations, so think about the last slide about kind of riding on your tiptoes versus riding with the whole of your foot kind of engaged on the floor. If the shoe is not kind of providing that kind of support that you need, that kind of foundation for your feet to kind of really push and to generate good power against, if you're every time you're pushing down on the pedal, then you're kind of your foot's wobbling around and searching for the stability, then that's kind of not efficient. It's energy wasted. It's energy going into your body trying to stabilize itself rather than just concentrating on pushing power and generating the most amount of force against the pedals and getting you as fast as possible. And over time, again, the longer distances is kind of where it matters. Those kind of micro adjustments of stability have a cost. They have a cost against just your overall kind of energy system. If you have to work harder just to maintain your position within the shoe, then yeah, that's energy that could be, well, energy loss that could be going into kind of powering you through the run. Imagine like, running in shoe size, which is too big, you just wouldn't do it because, your foot's slopping around. And the same thing happens with kind of triathlon shoes. If they don't fit well, and it's harder to get a good fit through your triathlon shoe themselves. So have a good think about your triathlon specific shoes. If you're racing kind of short course, then yeah, maybe these are the shoes for you. But long course, you have far more choice, and the couple of seconds it takes just to slip on your kind of standard road bike shoes may actually be a faster option in the long run because you can run faster at the end of it. But overall, also the message is get some shoes that fit. So getting bike shoes that fit is actually a lot trickier than you might think. But yeah, and on the back of that as well, like you got to get a shoe that fits, but also allows you a good cleat position. So that's where the trick lies. You kind of satisfy a number of different prerequisites in terms of shoe fit. And finally, we're going to go on to heat management. So everyone loves some aero gains, um, but I stuck a slide of Chrissy Wellington there doing Kona on a trusty Cannondale. Um, and every time she raced there, she never wore an aero helmet. She always wore a ventilated helmet just because of the conditions. It was so hot there. And yeah, that didn't really stop her from doing too badly. So I always like using that example of someone who is kind of racing to the conditions that they are kind of that the course demands. And heat management itself is massive. There's so many studies out there now about it's not even just like the heat itself, but the perception of heat and what the effect that has on your performance in your body. Because essentially, heat is a stressor, and if your body perceives that this heat is like a big stress upon your body, then it's going to kind of use energy to kind of manage that heat and put out like kind of more sweat and so on. And there's many different things. And so anyone who's been to Kona or kind of thinking about racing Kona, you kind of understand how important kind of acclimatizing to that heat is. You know, to the point of doing, if you live in Northern Europe, then you're going to be doing some sauna training or heat acclimatization, things like that. But if you think about it on a kind of a smaller level, on a micro level, then aero helmets themselves have a cost of creating more heat. Like you shove your head into an aero helmet, and yeah, sure, it looks cool and it goes fast, but the cost is like generating so much more heat. There's a big reason why cycling helmets are ventilated. Your head creates probably the most heat out of all your kind of body organs. So that heat has to go somewhere, and if there's just too much of it, then that's going to be detrimental to your overall performance. And so you can kind of test this, and you can see how well you are kind of acclimatized to heat. And some of those things, like put a slide of our friends at Precision Hydration who run sweat testing. And it is like it's kind of a sweat testing for sure is like a set physiological kind of individuality. Like once you get one sweat test, you kind of know your sweat rate, and your response to or can certainly gauge your response to kind of heat a lot better. And so if you know that you're someone that sweats a lot and kind of has a high sweat rate, and if you're going into like a hot environment or want to use an aero helmet for a lot of these things, then yeah, it may be worth kind of tailoring some of that nutrition, some of that sodium content intake, and some of your training around making sure that you can manage the heat that you're going to kind of take on by taking on this equipment. And yeah, again, it's a fine balance of are the advantages of kind of aerodynamics going to be or kind of outweighing the kind of heat induction that you're going to get with like an aero helmet itself. And different aero helmets have different choices as well. Some, like this cat-like helmet in the image here, has a big vent at the front. Others are kind of completely sealed. So so it's down to you as an individual, as an individual athlete, your course, what are the demands of your course, and how well you've kind of trained into your equipment in your course.
Yeah, I
So
think
I
just
don't.
a second that, like, I think keeping the core body temperature down is so important, and I think you can see that now in professional triathlon, but before that, professional cycling, where a lot of the guys pre-time trial are in ice vests, and Bi-Racer pioneered one before Tokyo for athletes, and it's essentially like a gilet with ice, and there's a massive advantage. Even if it can keep your core temp down for the first kind of 10-15 minutes, the power you can put out with that lowered core temperature just has a massive difference. So I think, like Wade's saying, like there's a lot of companies selling kind of aerodynamic gains, but they all have a cost. And particularly if you've got an aero helmet that cooks you like a chicken on the bike, then it's gonna really impact your day negatively.
Yeah. So an interesting thing, I used to do some training myself on the turbo with my aero helmet on. It's just like the most disgusting training session ever, but it did actually help. So if you do want to use an aero helmet. Like try it on the turbo, train with it, wear it as much as possible, get used to it. So it's like it's like why we swim with swim caps on. No one swims with a swim cap on to look cool, but one of the best reasons to train with a swim cap on is that you're going to race with it. So get used to it. Um, all right, so got a bonus. There you go, number 6. Just wanted to quickly touch on cycling as a skill. That image in the top right is Yuri, who won T100 in Singapore.
Singapore, yeah.
Yeah, and he won it, but he was an absolute bit. So yeah, that's quite a good example actually of heat acclimatization. Someone who is not used to the Singapore humidity and heat. I mean, he won, but there was a massive cost to it. He was in hospital for a few days, so that's something to be to take into account. But the interesting thing about that was that he missed 5 bottles in the feed zone area. So he was riding along, stretched out his hand, and he was trying to grab bottles off. There's like loads of kind of helpers giving out bottles and so on. But I think some of it was to do with the conditions. It's humid, it's slippery, and so on. But he had missed 5 bottles, and that probably made quite a big difference to his day. If he couldn't get that kind of hydration in that kind of temperature, in those kind of conditions, then that's probably going to lead to a bigger cost than needed. And so practicing skills is an important part of triathlon. And overall, these skills are going to have an impact on your overall performance. Like for Yuri, if he couldn't get the hydration on board, he didn't have the skill to get that hydration and sodium on board when he needed it, it's going to impact his run. Similarly with these other guys, if you are not comfortable riding your time trial bike and how the bike handles, like we go over here, like cranking his bike over, that takes skill. That is a learned skill, because riding a time trial bike is tricky. It's the weight balance is all different to a regular bike, so for those aerodynamic gains, you need to be able to handle your bike. And if you're not comfortable on that bike, you cannot relax into your position, then you kind of lose all the aerodynamic gains that you kind of were wanting to get out of that bike already. And the energy cost of being tense and not comfortable in your bike is going to have like a big impact on your run. And there's the 2 slides at the bottom left, Lucy Charles on her Red Bull helmet, and I can't remember who that is on the right hand side, but it's a fairly old photo, kind of a pretty old school kind of tri-bike position. But you can see that he's kind of hunched over, kind of in a hunched over kind of posture, his head sticking up. His aero helmet isn't kind of in contact with his back. It's actually not very aerodynamic because there's a big gap there. His arms are tilting down, and so he's pretty tense. His whole body is trying to stop himself from kind of falling forward, and so you can't relax into a long, elongated neutral spine position. And so, his bike fit's having a big impact on his overall kind of performance and his handling on the bike. And we see this all the time from people who haven't been riding outside, haven't been acclimatizing to their kind of bike. So if you've been spending a lot of time indoors training on your trainer, it's time to go outside. Like especially now, like it's lovely, like it's 7 o'clock, it's sunny outside. Get outside, ride your bikes, get used to handling the bike, get relaxed into the position, get comfortable with staying in that kind of aero position. That's our bonus little tip.
Yeah, I just kind of second that. I think it's difficult, especially with people here, mostly living in London, to get out on the time trial bike and be in that position for long periods is difficult.
Yep.
I mean, obviously places like Richmond Park are good for that. But for people like, I think some people look at some of the professional athletes and say, well, he does always training inside, which might be the case, but they probably had sort of 8 to 10 years of riding outside before that. So like you need to be able to ride comfortably in there, that if you have a time trial bike, for example, in the bars outside, and not only you need to be in the bars, you need to be able to change gear, you need to be able to interpret the road, you need to be able to descend and climb, and these are huge gains. And every 10 seconds you spend outside the bars it's a real waste in energy and speed. So If you have invested in a expensive time trial bike, then to do it justice, you really need to practice on the outside as well.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, well said, Cole. Let's crack on. Just a quick few ones. Knowledge is performance. So some pictures of Jan down there. But yeah, the more you know about yourself and the more you know through things like these webinars, things like that, the more you can kind of start to access your performance. And your bike fit you should be in control of, and this is how you can kind of take control of your performance as well. Like if you can kind of have a bike fit, and it's always cyclical, it's never complete, but the more you can kind of spend on it and the more you kind of go through this kind of process of fitting, adapting your body, testing it, refitting it, adapting, testing, the more in control you're going to feel of everything, and making sure that as your body changes, you change with it as well. And yeah, and actually probably spoke for a little bit longer than we wanted to, but thought we got our points across, and hopefully that was interesting. But if you guys got any questions at all, very happy to stay on. If you guys want to stay on for a little bit longer, then yeah,
Sure.
quite happy to kind of take some questions and see what we've got. So yeah, I don't know if we things happening in the chat box, or if anyone wants to jump on the mic. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen any kind of trends in your athletes, Cole, about kind of running off the bike or doing things that are happening on kind of some of those brick sessions.
Yeah, I think I always tell people to get the admin done up front, and I guess what I mean by that is I'd say bike fit is part of that admin, because it's not a one and done thing. So if your first race is in April, May, then you need to be pretty comfortable on the bike by kind of January, February. And if you wait to get that bike fit until February, March, then there's only so much time you have to get used to that position. There's only so many iterations you can make. So I think my main message for a lot of people is try and race early in the season, because that's where you're able to learn and make those changes, because I think it's also very difficult to simulate the kind of race feel on the bike, and I think that kind of really speeds up the process. So if you can get some early season races building up to your A race of the year, I certainly recommend that to try and cut the learning curve as quick as possible.
Yeah. And when you were racing Ironman, did you race with tri shoes or did you race kind of road bike shoes, Cole?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually raced in tri shoes, and I think, to be honest, like it made a difference. Although we were on the bike for 4+ hours, if you didn't make the bike pack out the swim, then you would be alone for 4 hours. So actually, long distance racing, although you're out there for a lot longer, it was actually super important to get out the swim and be straight on the bike. Even though the shoes weren't as efficient, if you weren't kind of on the back of that train, then you lose 10-15 minutes on the bike. So but again, I don't necessarily recommend that. As you say, it depends where you're at and what you're doing, but I think road bike shoes are so much more comfortable and snug. So yeah.
So I've got a little question from Ben here. Stock crank lengths aren't hugely different, so 175 mil, 172.5, 170. What sort of effect on hip angle would a drop of 2.5 or 5 mil in crank length have on the average rider? So yeah, good question. Couple of points here. The first one is that the difference in crank length, doesn't sound like that much. So 175 to 172.5 to 170, 2.5 millimeters, not that much. And I don't usually see a huge kind of change in a 2.5 mil jump. A 5 mil jump, most people will feel the difference in that. Mainly because where it matters most, 5 mil actually turns into 10 mil of difference. Because if you imagine your crank length, let's say you go from 175 to 170 mil crank, at the bottom of your pedal stroke, if you put a shorter crank on, then to keep the same leg extension to the bottom of the pedal stroke, if from the top of the saddle, if you go from a longer crank to a shorter crank, then you're going to have to raise your saddle 5 millimeters. Now, when you turn that crank arm all the way up to the top of the pedal stroke, then it's already 5 mil shorter in the crank length, but you've also raised your saddle up 5 millimeters. So you actually double the amount of distance. So there's a 10 mil difference in what you feel at the top of the pedal stroke. Now, those of you who've gone through a bike fit will know that you absolutely will feel the difference between a 10 mil difference in seat height. You will feel it straight away. So if there's a 10 mil difference in the amount that in that kind of hip angle, or the amount that leg has to kind of lift up, then you're more than likely going to feel it. And a lot of it also depends on your mobility, your hip mobility, flexibility, how far you bent over already, at what point you are in that kind of pedal stroke. But most people will feel the difference. Some people won't, and this is what you kind of have to test. You have to figure out, does it matter for you? Most people all kind of notice some positivity, or even if you don't notice it, going to a shorter crank tends to kind of make sense, just from a biomechanical point of view. Hopefully that kind of makes sense, Ben. Cool. Any other questions? Stefan, is there also a difference in main muscle groups versus time trial? My guess would be more quad dominant to save the hamstrings for the run. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So yeah, when you're placed into a TT bike position, essentially your whole body position is kind of shifted forward. So generally I try to get people to think about their bike position as a squat. So if you imagine you're trying to squat down, bending your knees, keeping your back flat and kind of leaning forward, that's essentially kind of what you're doing on in a bike position. When you get into TT position, what you're trying to do is to kind of get your body into a lower position. Now, you can just kind of lower your body down relative to a road bike position, but then you kind of close off the hips. And so the more common way to kind of get into that kind of low TT position is to push your hips forward, kind of over the bottom, over your feet a little bit more, so that you can kind of open out that hip angle. Now, as soon as you tip yourself forward, imagine you kind of in your squat and then kind of tipping forward onto your tiptoes, you become more unbalanced, and more of that body weight is coming forward. And if you do that test of kind of tipping forward in a squat position, you'll notice that your quads will kind of become way more active, because they're kind of having to work to kind of stop you from falling over. So the same thing happens on the bike. You become a lot more quad dominant as you get into that. So the further forward you sit into your kind of TT position. Now this can be good.
I was kind of trying to say, is there a difference between like long distance triathlon and an out and out kind of TT position in terms of that? Basically, though, is a triathlon you further forwards than or versus a TT where maybe they sit further back in the saddle? Or
yeah, so there's a couple of things. So usually, actually, what I prefer is for Ironman athletes to sit a little bit further back, which may sound counterintuitive, but that is mainly so that you get better balance of muscle distribution. So the further forward you go, the more quad you use, the less hamstring you use. But I'd rather find a more balanced kind of access to muscle recruitment. So, if you can use your quads and your hamstrings and your glutes in a more equal fashion, then you're going to get off the bike without having kind of smoked kind of one kind of muscle group. So if you smoke your quads whilst you're biking, your muscle groups work in pairs. So the reciprocal muscle group to your quads is your hamstrings. So if your quads aren't working, your hamstrings also can't work. So this is why kind of like balancing stuff out becomes really important. And a lot of this depends on your physiology and kind of what you're capable of. You might find that you're like a very quad dominant kind of athlete, and that's fine if you can get off the bike and kind of use your hamstrings to kind of power the run. But if you are getting off the bike and you find that every time you get off you're like, oh man, I've smoked my quads or I've smoked my hamstrings, then and that's stopping me from running, then yeah, something could change in your bike fit.
I was going to say, just on that way, is for someone that, obviously it's in an ideal world, you'd have more parity across muscle groups. But if you find that you're kind of constantly overworking the quads, what are the kind of cues that you could say to athletes to think about so they can increase the activation of their glutes as opposed to their quads on the bike? Are there any things they can do on the fly, or maybe like before the bike, to help that happen?
Yeah. So going back to what we were talking about, being on your tiptoes, like if you can just think about a little bit, just about dropping the heels a little bit, then you'll start to activate some of that posterior chain a little bit more, a bit like, again, going from tiptoes and being on your quads to kind of utilizing more of the whole of the foot to push down through, and you'll get a little bit more glute activation. Some in terms of just getting kind of muscle groups kind of fired up, you can just give them a tap. You'll see a lot of like kind of rugby players and football players, like before a match, just kind of like bashing them all over, patting themselves all over, patting their legs and so on. And literally sometimes the muscles just need a bit of waking up. So if you feel like your glutes aren't kind of waking up, then yeah, pat your glutes. Try not to get your mates to do that, but yeah, do it yourself. Yeah, just kind of smack them all over and see if you can get those muscle groups firing.
Also, maybe some banded work as well, like like, I mean, obviously the shorter the distance, the more like instant you need the firing to happen, so that the more important the warm-up is. But even in Ironman, I think like having a band, doing some banded work before you get on the bike just kind of almost reminds the muscles where they need to recruit, because I think some people they can get on the bike and their glutes can even overactivate. So I've known guys that's happened to, and the quads can overactivate. So I think that is definitely a fine balance. And when you're on the kind of it can make the difference, that warm up, that kind of, I always call it kind of priming. And one thing I've kind of done more recently is get athletes to do a brick session the day before a race. Which I always used to see Angelino do and thought it was a bit too much, but actually it really primes the body for what's to come. You don't have to be fresh to do an Ironman or a sprint distance triathlon. You need that kind of almost weathered feel. So doing something a little bit intense the day before, like not a huge amount, but that can really get the muscles going.
Oh, absolutely. Like just that kind of waking up of the system, and your body kind of responds to what it has experienced the most and most recently as well. Let's say, like, if you do any kind of stretching work just before bedtime, it tends to stick better because the body kind of remembers it. It kind of traps that kind of neuromuscular kind of movement pattern in there. And so but one of the best things I did for like when I was racing like kind of time trials, kind of doing 10 mile TT, one of the biggest changes was not just getting fitter, but doing a warm-up before the actual TT itself. I thought my coach was mad. It's like, what are you doing? I'm going to get smoked because, I'm going to be really tired before the TT. But actually what we were doing, it was such a short distance that, everything just needed to be woken up and kind of ready to go before the race itself. So, like 5 minutes before the race, you'd still be like kind of pedaling away and giving it, a hard effort. And essentially what you're doing on Ironman is doing that, but just over a longer period of time.
I'd also say as well in your training that, when you get in that specific period, sort of maybe 2 weeks out from a race, I would almost cut warm-ups, completely. So you almost go, let's say you have a turbo session and you've got some race pace intervals, then maybe giving yourself even 2-3 minute warm up max, so you get used to going straight into the power. If normally you're used to spending 30 minutes warming up, you don't have that during a race. So you need to get used to going from zero to race pace in a matter of minutes. And the same goes, on the swim and the bike. I see people do 1 kilometer warm ups within the day. Most triathlons, they give you, 5 minutes. So just get, as the races get closer, you need to do more specific training as the races approach, and that goes for tailoring the warm-ups, tailoring the banded work, and getting the body activated in the right way.
Yeah, cool. And just one last point for Stefan. You just comparing kind of time trialists to triathletes. Time trialists, unfortunately, are kind of banded by or kind of constrained by kind of UCI regulations. So, there's some, I don't know, ridiculous rules around like kind of how far forward you can kind of stick your saddle. So they're often sat a little bit too far back for their kind of needs. Whereas triathletes are kind of free to explore, and so yeah, you can get some pretty crazy positions.
Yeah.
I think Detlef, like on his bike, he's a big guy, but he sits super far forward, and seems to work with him. But I don't know, he hasn't quite cracked his run yet, so maybe he's too far forward.
Yeah, that it makes sense about the muscle balancing. I've heard Sam Long before talk about like just like using different muscles throughout different parts of the cycle. Like when one muscle gets tight, you start cycling in a different way. Is that like a normal thing? Is it all recommended? It sounds a bit odd, or is that just something he has to do?
I think it's difficult. So some of it might be simply psychological, and some of it may be that like as soon as so think of it like breathing. Like when you are kind of going about your day-to-day life, you don't have to think about your breathing; it's automatic. But you can think about your breathing if you want to. You can hold your breath. You can breathe deep. You can breathe long, and so there is some control there. And I kind of think about pedaling in the same way. And so pedaling, when you're pedaling a bike, you're making 10,000 revolutions an hour. That's there's too many revolutions to be consciously thinking about it the whole time, especially if you're doing an Ironman. Like 6 hours of just thinking about how you're pedaling, it's not possible. But on occasion, you can think about it. And maybe you're at some point, maybe, I don't know, I got out of a swim once and my quads were absolutely smoked. I don't know what I was doing in the swim, but I just couldn't use my quads. And so I had to think about just using glutes and hamstrings on the bike for quite a long time until my quads settled down. So yeah, maybe that's kind of like part of it. But as soon as you stop thinking about it, your body will just go back to automatic.
I think you can think about it, and you can make adjustments on the fly, but I think it comes with a territory. I think if you're more of an experienced athlete, you can feel that certain muscle groups are overactivating. Then you might want to, for example, slightly move your position on the saddle. You can make those kind of adjustments on the fly. And I think a lot of athletes do that. And even on the run, right? Like if you know that you've overactivated the quads on the bike, or the quads feel pretty bad, then you're going to have to be really careful on the run and make sure you lean forward and make sure you land slightly differently. So like I think you can do that, but and I think the best athletes do that. They can kind of read where they're fatiguing and make very small adjustments. But I do think it takes quite a lot of experience to kind of make that decision on the fly.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And Sam Long was certainly an experiment of one.
Yeah. I don't know. What were you feeling on the bike, Stefan? Are you feeling kind of?
It's nothing in particular. I don't feel like it's something that I need to do dramatically. I think sometimes maybe I'll do it slightly, but not like I need to like flip the muscle groups or anything like that.
I think also, just Stefan, like I think the hardest courses are actually the flat courses for time trialing. If you're doing an Ironman this year or 70.3 and it's pan flat, like don't think that's easy. Like I would say the flattest courses are the hardest courses physiologically, because you're essentially not really moving much. And you see a lot of athletes come off those courses with massive amounts of cramp because essentially they haven't conditioned themselves to stay in that single position for 2, 3, 5 hours. And actually, if you've got a rolling hilly course, it gives you an opportunity to move position, even get out the saddle. Descending is free speed, 3 kilometers. So actually, I think like if you've got a flat race, then you have to be even more conditioned to get through that race without having a problem. That makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, you see that with Tour de France cyclists as well. If you've got a hilly mountain stage and so on, then some of them will be climbing out the saddle, some will be in the saddle for ages, and then someone will cramp up, and they'll have to use different muscle groups that way, and so on. So yeah, there's different ways of controlling things, but the more you can experiment in your training, the better. So yeah, if that's a question in your mind, give it a go. Try it out.
I think one way to view like training, especially on a time trial bike, you could say that the only kilometers that count are the ones in the TT bars. And I think a lot of people would find that they've only, before their big race, spent just a matter of a few hours in that position. And I think it's just super important to be in that position as much as you can. And then also you realize like the cost in that. and you realize what you have to do to kind of mold your body to that position, but also to kind of unwind it from that position as well.
Cool. All right.
Any other questions?
All quiet.
No.
That didn't sound like a question. All right, should we wrap it
Yeah,
up
let's
there?
wrap up. Yeah, thanks, Wade, for your time. Appreciate it. I think people know where to find you since you sent an email.
Yeah, find us at foundation.fit if not, or get in touch with Colin, and yeah, he can direct you.
And any questions that people didn't want to voice now but they can do it over email. So yeah, drop us an email if you've got any questions. And good luck this season. Thanks.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Colin.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.